Welcome to the Sex, God, and Chaos podcast, a conversation built to help you address the mess, connect the dots, and defeat addiction. Doing your work matters because if nothing changes, then nothing changes. Life is tough and we're here to help. I'm your host, Derrick, and as always, I'll be joined by Roane. Let's jump right in.
Roane, it's hot here.
We are in Mississippi.
Man.
Yeah.
Did you walk outside last night by any chance?
Oh, gosh. The humidity is, it's real.
Yes, unbelievably real, actually. I was like, there's a reason why people move. And last night was it.
Oh, gosh. It's not even summer yet.
Yes, that's kind of the worst part about it. There are people that listen to this podcast that are at very temperate climates. And we are very, very jealous of you.
Yeah, we are not that.
Well, I don't know what it says about our intelligence that we've stayed here, but here we are.
Yeah, dude, I always say the settlers, when they settled here, obviously did not come through in the summer. They would have kept going.
That's right. Well, let me say behind Mike, before we get going with our topic today, man, it is good to sit with you. It is good to sit with a brother, with a friend. I love you. I love these conversations. And the things that we talk about, I'll readily admit, I listen back to just to get some help for my own self, right, for my own story. So it's an honor to be a part of the effort.
Oh, dude, likewise, just love doing this with you. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. So today we've got something that it's intriguing to me. In fact, we're late recording this episode because we had an episode before we turned the mics on.
We should have been recording.
That's right.
It was really good stuff.
Yeah, this is going to get some people thinking. So you opened up by saying, have you ever thought about why it is so difficult for people to change?
Yeah, of course, so much of what we sit with and, people want to change. We want to do it different. And, and it's kind of like New Year's resolutions, right? I'm going to change. But then, about a week into our change process, we revert right back to the old behaviors, right? And I think there's reasons why real change is so hard. Because some of this that we work with is even, maybe it's not personality changes, but man, these are deep changes in how we think, how we behave, that are very ingrained and autonomic, like blinking. Because we've been conditioned to it, we probably saw it modeled, and we're just doing what we got trained to do. And it's in our DNA often, well, not often, but I think always. It's generational. And so this, like, really making changes is a difficult process, but it is doable. And there's things that I believe have to be a part of that in order for change to occur.
It's very interesting. We often ask our clients the question, well, how long have you been involved with this behavior?
Yeah.
And then we get an answer, which is usually in some term of years. Well, how long have you been trying to change this behavior? Man, I've been at this 8 weeks. I don't know. When is this going to change?
Yeah. Or, you get I've been trying on my own, right?
Yeah.
And there's a reason why, trying on your own never works. It's like you probably not a good idea to do surgery on yourself.
Ouch.
Yeah. But it's just not going to work. And I always, when somebody tells me, man, I'm going to take some time and I'm going to work on myself. And I'm always like, dude, that's what got you in my office in the first place. How's that going to work out?
Yeah. So we can acknowledge, and I think this will be very freeing for our listeners. If you're struggling to change, literally anything in your life, if you're struggling to change, it's going to be difficult. But there are reasons for that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
The predominant reason that we give ourselves though is because we're just terrible people. We're not disciplined enough. And let's just go ahead and get this out of the way. We're not Christian enough. We don't go to church enough.
You probably preached a lot of sermons like that
Yeah,
when you were pastoring.
man. So it's great for business.
and tithing.
Yeah. Put a little more money in the plate. Maybe you'll have a greater chance of change, right? It's sad reality there.
Sorry. Dude, that's such a cheap shot.
People listening, though, are like, yeah, I've been there. Been in that church service.
I just can't help myself.
Suffice it to say, there are a lot of reasons that we give for this, but they're predominantly negative and pointed at ourselves. We have a different interpretation of that reality that change is difficult that we want to roll out today.
Oh, yeah. Well, you nailed it. Even it's those messages that have formed in us. And we could call it our belief system because we're going to live out what we believe. I can have it in my head, sing the song, Jesus loves me, this I know, the Bible tells me so. At the same time, if I don't get that down into my gut, is kind of the way I say it, by rooting out the false beliefs that are there, which we would call shame, those are kind of core shame messages. I'm not enough. I'll never be able to do this. I don't know how to do this. I'm incompetent, inadequate, insecure. Those messages are the things that are driving our behavior because they're rooted in our thinking, and our emotions follow the way that we think. And so it's an emotional issue. It's really maybe not a thinking issue, but I've got to change my thinking in order for the emotions to begin to line up. And so, it's just a difficult process because, first of all, I've got to unlearn all the things that I learned, right? And I believe when Jesus was talking to Nicodemus, who was just probably would have been a great Presbyterian pastor, knew it all, had all the answers. He's a Pharisee, teacher of the law, the whole deal. But yet Jesus is sitting there with this guy that has all the Bible answers, right? Well, they didn't have the Bible, but that's a whole different podcast. We could go into that.
Wait a minute. What?
Oh, my gosh. Yeah. But this guy knows the Torah. He knows the deal, right? And Jesus is sitting there talking to this guy, and he's looking at him, and he's saying, like, dude, I believe that Jesus said dude a lot, right? Yeah, that's my Jesus. And he's like, dude, you don't get it. All this stuff that you learned, you've got to unlearn, and you've got to start over like a little child. You've got to be born again. Because that's what the change process takes. I've got to unlearn the things that I thought were going to make my life work. And a lot of times I'm not even aware of it because 9 times out of 10, it's what I saw modeled, especially when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, I'm going to interrupt you. Don't lose your train of thought. You're old and that happens.
It does.
I want to interrupt you there because I find this is the first critical point in that if we're going to unlearn the things that we've learned, we have to be aware of the things that we've learned.
Totally.
And that is literally the first segment, season, section of counseling intervention is helping people figure out what is it that you're mirroring that was modeled for you. What did you learn? What are your defaults? We're just so unaware of those things. And I know you believe that. You find that to be true as well. But people skip right over that because we're racing towards solution.
Yeah, gotta fix it.
Yeah, we're going to get there about how do we fix it actually. But we race towards these solutions and we're not even sure what we're trying to unprogram.
Right.
And it's kind of frightening to try to figure that out, isn't it?
Oh yeah, because again, I'm probably not even aware of it, of the false belief system. And of course, the Bible's very clear. We have an enemy. He's called the father of lies. These lies, this false belief system gets planted in us, and it is producing shame, lots of it. And we give the devil way too much credit. He's back home in Las Vegas. That's obviously where he lives. And he's just planted the seeds of shame, and they are at work in us. And we're living out a lie of who I am and what I believe, because it's always an I am message. It's just the old, guilt is I did bad. Shame says I am bad. And when we're just living out of that paradigm, we're going to operate from a shame-based worldview.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how do we solve that? I think we can do this quickly, because what I'm most eager for our listeners to hear is how we do effectively change. And I'm sure that's what they want to get to. But
no
just
doubt.
to skip across this a little bit, what are the solutions that we run to? I think it comes down to three things. Watch this, buy this, take this.
Oh yeah, that's where we are.
That's where we are as a culture.
Yeah.
If you watch this, it'll be okay. If you buy this, it'll be okay. If you take this, it will be okay. All those things have a very short shelf life, and they're obviously designed to increase the profit margin for somebody somewhere who's way less miserable than you are, right?
Yes.
Or maybe actually just as miserable, they just have money. But we are caught in this ecosystem, in this fishbowl of a culture that says avoidance is the solution, and we will purchase. I almost had to put an explicit there on this episode. We will purchase a crap ton.
Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Of avoidance rather than going to the thing.
To the roots.
To the roots.
Yeah, because that's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's kind of scary.
Hard, scary. Nobody taught us how.
Yeah.
So the remainder of this episode today is going to be hopefully you walking us through why, just even at a neurological level, why these things are difficult, and then based on that information, how to reverse engineer into change.
Oh, yeah. Well, if we just start with kind of the building block, that would be our brain, and just developmentally, the first part of the brain that's fully developed is the limbic part of the brain, the base part, sometimes referred to as the reptilian brain. And, in the limbic system, there's the hippocampus, which is the center of the brain for memory and emotion, and also the fear center of the brain, fear, action, and aggression, the amygdala. The amygdala in men is twice as large as it is in women.
That's not a compliment necessarily.
Yeah, fear, action, and aggression. I'm a man, right? That's what it is. And, fun fact, the amygdala actually goes offline during orgasm. That's one reason we will chase it, because in that moment, we sing hymns about it. All fear is gone, right?
Did you just do that?
I did.
I was thinking, I'm sorry, where was I? Just completely offline, like the world stopped spinning, or maybe it is. I don't care.
Yeah, but that's where the euphoric feeling comes from, man. And it's like
that's the chasing the scream.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the amygdala is there, and right across the street is the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure center. And man, we figure out, what makes that amygdala kind of chill out a little bit is some form of pleasure, right? Or comfort. And that could be food, could be sex, rock and roll. I mean, just whatever it is that provides a way of avoiding, mitigating the fear, the anxiety, because that's what it is.
You guys call this or teach this as the reactive avoidance model.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I'm avoiding by reacting, by going over across the street.
Yeah. I'm doing something to not deal with it, but to deal with it.
Right.
And it works for a minute. It's like the good old theologian, the good hymnal, falling feels like flying for a little while.
Yeah, till you hit the ground.
Yeah. It's that landing part that sucks.
That's Chris Stapleton, by the way. Congratulations.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a very modern artist for you to know.
Yeah, that's relevant.
Speaking of a man, we can't chase that rabbit. Keep going.
Yeah. So you've got this base part of the brain that is the first part of the brain to develop. The amygdala is fully developed because it's survival, fight, flight, or freeze, fear, action, aggression. And then the next part of the brain that's developing is the midbrain. The midbrain is the center for visual and auditory processing. So as the brain develops, as we develop, as we grow from an infant into a child, now I'm beginning to take in visual and auditory experience, right? And so things are forming based on the way the brain is developing. And if there were these things in my life that were going on, and I'll just use, for me, my parents divorced when I was 8 years old, really 7. And prior to that, it was just pretty hellish. I don't have many memories, except for, one giant argument in the kitchen, screaming bloody murder. That was my memories of mom and dad. But that trauma, because that's a big T trauma, man, that had a huge impact. And again, developmentally, I'm only 8 years old. And so my brain is far from being fully formed. So now I've got this frozen memory of my parents divorcing and the memories of the fights and the stuff that was going on. And some of it is not conscious remembrance. Some of it is stories that I've heard about what was going on. But they're there. And so those things are frozen in that memory and emotion in the hippocampus. And they're there. And so now I'm experiencing, as I'm getting older, just again, visual learning, auditory learning. And so the belief system is forming, right? And in those traumas, in those things that are happening, that belief system that already is in me, that somehow it's my fault, my parents' divorce, I'm bad. Well, other experiences begin to reinforce that. And that could be with friends, that could be with teachers, could be with brothers and the wolf pack, as I call them. But I'm these experiences are going on, and it's reinforcing and like locking in that belief system that is already there. And so now, as I get older, the frontal cortex, where that's logic and thinking and even moral reasoning, is the last part of the brain to develop. Well, I've had all these experiences in my life where I've formed a belief system that says I am unworthy. We could put a ton of I am messages around those things that occur. And those things sometimes are natural and normal experience, but if a disattuned parent does not know that their child is hurting in some way because they're just self-absorbed and dealing with all their own crap, there's no correction to that thinking. And so, and we don't even have, like at 8 years old, I didn't have the emotional language to be able to even talk about what I was experiencing emotionally. And so now you're left with this stuff, and children are great observers and terrible interpreters. I'm interpreting these things in my life. I'm observing it, and then I'm interpreting it in some negative way because it's somehow it's about me. It's my fault. Even again, older brothers, their buddies, the wolf pack. They always say they were my protectors, and they were also my terrorists, right? At the run of the litter, you get a lot of flack. But there was a part of me, it's like, oh man, I got to really work to fit in. I want to fit in with these guys. I don't want to be rejected. And so, part of the, learning how to drink beer when you're, 12 years old, it's important, growing up in Mississippi.
Yes.
But all of that was like just based on these messages, this false belief system that somehow I'm not worthy and I've got to do something in order to gain acceptance and approval and be a part of the club.
And that's stored at a very young base part of the brain, part of your development.
Right.
I can give an example just quickly of something that's stored down in there for me based on this disattunement. It's my job to connect and to please.
Yeah.
That's my job.
You learned it well.
Yeah. It's not my parents' job to connect to me. It's my job to connect to them. And then after I connect with them, it's my job to please them. And that's why I'm so tough on religion, because we have so many people walking around in faith communities that believe exactly that thing.
Yes.
It's my job to connect, and it's my job to please. And the biblical narrative rushes against that false core belief nearly with every page. but we don't see it. We can't see it because it's almost like it's set up like concrete. And it's so difficult to change. Even when you get out to this more developed, higher thinking part of the brain, it just cannot combat that message that's stored so deep.
Yeah, well, the thinking, the prefrontal cortex, just developmentally, those things that we are thinking and feeling now become part of how I'm going to act and behave, right? And so, our thinking is going to be off. It's going to be distorted when we look at like what's a whole person? What is maturity? What is wholeness? And so this stuff has formed in me, and my thinking is off. And so now I'm going to live out what I believe, and that's why yes, it gets preached a lot of times is like, deny yourself, Ben. You don't have any needs. You don't have any desires.
You do, but they're bad.
Yeah. It's like those are selfish, right?
Yeah.
And it's so. Again, that stuff gets spoken that way. We hear it that way, especially when we've got distorted thinking, and it's why it's part of the setup, and why there's so many Christians, church people, whatever word we want to put around that are walking around and just have no idea what it means to be whole and healthy relationally and emotionally.
Okay, let's take it to just some practical. Here's how this works out. You can watch as many David Goggins shorts on YouTube as you want. You're probably not going to become a Navy SEAL or even run a marathon.
Yes.
But when you're watching it, you're like, oh man, that's right. I can do that. I can be that. And you can walk into your faith community and listen to a sermon, and some of the worst are the longest, by the way.
Always.
You sit through the sermon, you're like, you know what? That's right. I can do that. And then you're at each other's throats in the vehicle on the way home.
Yeah, on the way to lunch. Yeah.
Yeah. So we say it this way: information isn't going to fix this.
No, because frontal cortex, last part of the brain to develop, and the way that most people want to change is like, I'm going to go get some information. I'm going to go gain some knowledge, and those things are not bad. And so I'm taking this information in, like that's prefrontal cortex, right? And then it's like, there's a problem though, because the midbrain is processing it in light of my developmental false belief system. And then it gets to that limbic system, the hippocampus, memory and emotion, that say, oh man, you'll never change. You can't do that. And so the information in and of itself is not ever going to produce change. I tell pastors that all the time, that your hour and a half sermon is just ineffective. And so is sitting on a couch cognitively talking about something. Research has shown that it's the most ineffective way for somebody to change.
Yeah.
Because in that midbrain development, visual and auditory, that is more experiential, right? Limbic part would be, I would just call it more spiritual and emotional. But the visual and auditory part is kind of the physical reality. And the things that occurred in our lives all happened in some relational and emotional context with others.
Yeah.
And so the way that you're going to change is, I've got to get in some type of authentic community where there is somebody looking me in the eye and they are saying words to me like, man, you've got what it takes. I love you. I've been there. I'm with you. We're going to get through this together. Because really what that is, Jesus with skin on, and I'm having, words spoken, and I'm hearing it, and I'm taking it in, and I'm making eye contact, which is, produces, trust and bonding hormones. And so now it's beginning to go deeper into that part of me where that stuff is frozen in experientially. So it's got to be experiential. I've got to hear feedback. It's like, how can I change if I don't have honest feedback from people that love and care for, that I trust? Yeah. I've got to trust them, not a an accountability group where you're the project, right? There's no two-way reciprocal intimacy that's occurring. I'm the project.
Well said, yeah.
Yeah, we're here to fix me.
Mm-hmm.
And that sucks. I've been in those types of groups. But I've got to get in an experiential environment because that's where the correction of the behaviors, the belief system, is going to begin to take root. And the first thing that I've got to do is I've got to begin to look at the blockage in the hippocampus, memory and emotion. I've got to begin to uncover those false belief systems. I've got to understand, become aware of how those things formed in my life. And then I've got to put truth to those false beliefs, truth to the lies.
It's so simple.
It really is.
It's so simple.
Yeah, we're going to put ourselves out of a job.
It's just so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And you definitely can't do it alone, as you've already mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
This is where I think that storytelling becomes so critical. Let me explain what I mean. When I'm sitting with a client talking about the reactive avoidance trauma model, it's a beautiful model.
Yes.
And I'm rolling through it, but I always stop and I say, okay, let me tell you how this worked in my life.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
When I went to elementary school, I was bullied all day long. I came home, and my family had a membership to Sam's. Thank God, right? And I would get a Sam-sized bag of Doritos, and I would make brownies, and I would go upstairs alone. I would eat all the Doritos in the bag and finish the brownies.
Wonderful.
Yeah, which
comfort
actually sounds like an amazing day right now. But as a child, when you do it on repeat, that's not good behavior.
Yes.
This isn't going to lead to good things.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I was doing that, and then I say, because the story I was telling myself was, I wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And then I look at the client and say, what's the story that you're telling yourself? And man, they start opening up about what those stories are, and it's usually based on some sort of embarrassing thing that's happened or difficult thing that's happened. And this is where we ask that question over that base part of the brain. What if that's not true? What if the story that you're telling yourself isn't true?
Yeah.
And man, you can see it shed off of people. Now, it doesn't solve it when they leave.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
But it's a moment of, it's like watching someone's lungs expand for the first time in a decade, because this is the type of work that we do. It's the type of work that I've been trained to do as I've spent time around you guys. But let's acknowledge, this isn't necessarily common in the counseling world.
Yeah, that's problematic. I would encourage, go back and listen to our episode on helper trauma.
Yes.
That's what we call it. Because, and even like, we talk about it, but this, like you're sharing personal stories, in counseling world, you actually get trained to not do personal disclosure. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, man, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
You disagreed with that? Shocking.
Yeah, weird. And certainly you have to have boundaries, but the best way to get people to see it is when you're telling your own story of how this stuff worked out, was part of your life, and the things that you did that really began to change it.
Yeah. There's a line, certainly. I mean, I'm not going to share with the client my most traumatic sexual experiences as an adolescent.
Yeah.
But Doritos and brownies, that's pretty safe.
That's pretty benign. Yeah.
Yeah. But it gets the point across in that I have been on this journey too. I know what it's like to believe false messages.
Yeah.
And that is the skin on part, the eye contact part. And if you have a clinician that is just looking for a diagnosis or somebody to blame or to push a particular solution set on you, just proceed with caution.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
I think it was Melody Beatty. I get her and Pia Melody mixed up.
Makes sense.
The codependent Bible writers. But I think it was Melody Beatty that talks about, she was working in a treatment center, and she began to notice that like none of the people in treatment were getting any better. Which is pretty much the norm.
Right.
And so she started doing a group in the treatment center with the patients. And in the group, she began to talk about some of her own personal struggles and, things that she had gone through, and like people started actually connecting with her. And then they actually began to feel cared for, and those people began to get better. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, I call it rocket surgery. But,
yes.
So what we're saying here, just to make sure that we haven't talked so much around it, we've confused our listeners. We're basically saying to start right there. You don't start with prefrontal cortex. You don't start with the reptilian brain. You start with human connection.
Amen.
That's where you start.
It is the cure.
Yeah.
Brene Brown talks about it in her. I think there's been 100 million views on her TED Talk of vulnerability. But in her research, she talks about wholehearted people, and then the rest of us. But in her research, she says there were two things that became evident of the people that were struggling, and the thing that was there, it was shame and fear, right? And then the people that were wholehearted, they have a tremendous sense of worthiness. And so when we've got these shame messages that telling that every day, I'm unworthy, then I'm probably going to live that out in some way, shape, or form. And those things in the hippocampus, that memory and emotion, I say it's kind of like a refrigerator with an ice machine, ice maker, and when that ice maker gets all frozen up and it's not working worth a crap, you got to defrost the ice maker in order for it to begin to work right. And these memories and emotions that are frozen in that hippocampus that we've never talked about but are driving our behavior, I've got to begin to express that. I've got to begin to process that. And that is the healing of trauma. In the military, you probably know this, but they started working with exposure therapy for war veterans. And what it is, a guy comes in and he sits with the therapist, and the therapist says, "Okay, tell me your story, all the gory details." And so he tells his story with all the gory details, and the therapist looks at him and he says, "Okay, tell it again." And then tell it again. And okay. And then he tells him, "Okay, now go down the hall, get in that group with these other guys and that are telling their stories, and you tell your story." And talking about it, expressing it, getting it out in the context of connection, because you realize you're not alone, right?
Yes. Yeah. That really pushes against those shame messages.
Oh, yeah.
When you share your story and everybody doesn't leave the room.
Yeah.
they stay in there with you, which is an awesome feeling. And I think I'd like to maybe pause the episode here so we could loop back around. What I find, and I know you and I talk about this a lot, what is exceptionally dangerous is when we're engaged, locked in a relational dynamic that confirms our shame messages.
Oh, man.
That can get really dangerous.
Yeah.
Really messy.
Oh, yeah. And certainly in sex addiction work, porn addiction, all the stuff that we deal with, when discovery happens, what you have for some period of time is two people that are in a high level of emotional crisis, and everybody's spinning. And on the addict side, it's like the thing that's been driving my acting out is my shame. And now I've got a partner that's dealing with betrayal trauma, and a lot of times the thing that is going to come out first is anger, and they're going to say things that are very shaming, and that's just all part of the process. But I've got no ability to regulate my emotions, because the way I was dealing with my emotions was acting them out. And so now I don't know how to deal with my own emotions, and I've got this emotional creature just spinning in front of me, and it's just difficult three-ring circus.
No regulator and twice the shame.
Yeah.
Welcome to healing.
Everybody dance. Yeah.
All right, let's pause there. We'll pick back up and kind of move a little bit deeper into this idea of shame and betrayal and how that goes.
To learn more about what you've heard today and to engage with the Sex, God, and Chaos team, visit sexgodchaos.com.